Children mark the words.
So the Babylon system is a vampire, deceiving the people day by day.
You three criminals have been caught in a further act of seditious treason. General Zod, your only feeling was contempt for our society. Your only desire was to command. Ursa, the only feeling you showed was for your vicious general. Your only wish to rule at his side. Don, you are as without thought as you are without voice. This council has no hesitation in proclaiming you all guilty. 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 Guilty.
Education. The truth about education and life. The aim to take control of education with the intent and purpose of utterly and completely destroying it. Through the education system, students are made to learn and form opinions based on what the system teaches. Therefore, students are not being taught what to think, instead they are being manipulated on how to think. The result of this transforms the student into an educated drone who has actively gone through the standard educational system programming. This creates unstable and incompetent thinkers who have no self-knowledge or sense of truth. This has made it easier for the government and the elite to control the masses of people who have been restricted to their belief system. Without knowing, we unconsciously serve their agenda to help achieve their goals. The illusion of freedom is set, mentally and physically, using certain obstacles by disassociating the mind of the people, likewise allowing them to buy into this false freedom, which is manipulated and further controlled by the ruling elite. Once people rely on a certain establishment such as government to manage and control their lives, the true meaning of freedom is lost and replaced. The general population do not have the ability to become truly independent. Freedom is to have liberty and to be an individual, and to be free from the requirement provided by the system. Through each successive generation, people have been indoctrinated. Students grow in a significantly, increasingly and changing environment that prioritizes the economy, education, or getting a career job. This is achieved within the world by deceiving, restricting, and distracting the masses of people, in order to create a foolish, weak, independent, and deluded mind for the sole purpose of control. In schools and society, there is a strong emphasis in obtaining the status of one being educated, whilst ignoring the importance of wisdom and being wise. School education is knowledge, but sometimes useless knowledge, whilst wisdom is the use of the right application of true knowledge to bring about a righteous result. In schools, subjects are only taught with basic concepts and structures, without any synthesis to parts particular subjects is made from. This results in learning only the basic knowledge of a subject, where it is simply considered useless. People leave school after many years of study without having gained any real-life skills, knowledge, or experience to survive. Qualifications achieved in school cannot even secure a basic job, so students are forced to spend more years studying at college or university. A lack of balance, ineffective methods of teaching, poor structure of lessons, the continuation of subjects and repetition of information within a curriculum builds a negative learning environment and a way of learning. Nurturing specific skill sets is non-existent in schools. There is a lack of lessons that teach life skills. Schools fail to share the responsibility and role to set or prepare young people for entering adult and higher or advanced learning. Do not forget, the education system is controlled Not only do the Illuminati make it their goal to influence people with their own beliefs, they also make it their goal to change the dynamic of learning and education as previously mentioned. By changing the dynamic of learning, the Illuminati turn learning into something unenjoyable, like a boring job. Subconsciously, this persuades young people to stay away from learning practices. This achieves the goal of keeping people ignorant and dumb, and in a lower level of consciousness. People in this state resist the desire to seek new information in an effort to expand the mind. So you see, everything starts from education. If you do not have the correct education, you will never understand the truth, nor will you see the deception that exists right before your very own eyes.
My name is Stephen Round, and I am a second grade teacher in the Providence School Department. I came to the meeting 2 nights ago, and I wished to read this letter of resignation to you, but I was not given the opportunity, so I'd like to read it to you now. It's addressed to the Human Resources Department, Providence Public Schools. To Paula Shannon, Susan Lucy, Carolina Creel, the Providence School Board, and the parents of my students. Below you will find, word for word, my personal philosophy of education, which was part of my application for a teaching position in the Providence Public School System in 1999. I believe that my goal as an educator should be the creation of lifelong learners. If I am going to meet that goal, I must provide children with an educational experience that is both rewarding and enjoyable. Therefore, it is important for students to understand how the knowledge received in the classroom will benefit them in the real world. It is my responsibility as a teacher to find various ways to make the process possible. To do this, I must be creative and open-minded enough to try new methods and approaches, but perceptive enough to embrace only those methods and approaches that prove to achieve that end. I was hired for a second grade position by Principal Nancy Owen at what was then the Charles N. Forts Magnet Academy, and it was a great fit for several years. Unfortunately, in the attempt to conform and abide by the misguided notions of educrats, the school system in which I had so much pride drastically changed. Rather than creating lifelong learners, our new goal is to create good test takers. Rather than being the recipients of a rewarding and enjoyable educational experience, our students are now relegated to experiencing a confining and demeaning education. Let's take a look at their typical day. Breakfast is no longer served in the cafeteria, where children used to have time to talk and socialize. Now it is piled on a table in the classroom and consumed during the first moments of class, supposedly while they are working. Lunch isn't much better. By that time, the children are so starved for social contact and a chance to talk that the cafeteria quickly becomes unbearably loud for students and supervising faculty alike. The alternative, the dreaded silent lunch, is often the only answer. So now there's recess, which lasts all of 20 minutes when the weather permits. This should be time for all students to run around and work off their pent-up energy. But unfortunately, since recess is the only enjoyable part of the day for these students, teachers have been forced to use it as a bargaining chip in the classroom. Students either do their work, behave, and keep quiet during class time, or they lose recess. And more often than not, the kids who need the recess time the most lose it because of poor behavior in the classroom. So then it's time to line up quietly, form a straight line, and proceed back to the classroom for another session of learning. It's no small wonder that we have such a high rate of behavior disorder within our classrooms. I personally had 2 children in my class of 26 who were and still are severe behavior problems, and at least 6 more who would be considered moderate BD. Actually, there were only 4 or 5 children in the entire class who could consistently hold it together day after day without getting into trouble. My hat goes off to them. And as for the classroom experience itself, any type of fun activity is gone. Classroom pets? Gone. Parties to celebrate birthdays and special holidays? Gone. Gone. How about field trips? Those adventures out into the real world to experience what it's like to live on a farm. Trips to the zoo, and even the experience of visiting a real museum. Gone, gone, gone. And finally, my determination to be creative and open-minded enough to try new approaches to teaching. Ha! The powers that be say that if it isn't in the accepted curriculum and done at the appropriate time, it can't be used. Why, I was even prohibited from tutoring my neediest students, my so-called dyslexic students, on my own time and after school. Not just once, but twice, in 2 separate schools. And this was after my principal and the students' parents had approved of what I was doing. These parents were happy that their children were finally reading. The students were happy to know that they really weren't stupid. And I had the satisfaction of knowing that I was truly having a positive effect on children's lives. But Chief Academic Officer Shannon would rather see these 9 children fail than do something not specifically prescribed in this one-size-fits-all curriculum. When asked for a meeting, she literally would not give me, the students, or their parents the time of day. So, gone, gone, gone. I've had it. I quit. I would rather leave my secure $70,000 job with benefits and tutor in Connecticut for free than be part of a system that is diametrically opposed to everything I believe education should be. Thank you for listening.
So, trick question for Brady. Where does the sun rise?
The sun rises in the east.
Yeah, so that's the basic answer. Sun rises in the east, sets in the west. And it does that because we on Earth the Earth is rotating in that direction, which makes the apparent motion of the sun seem to track across the sky. But exactly where in the east the sun rises depends very much on the time of year and the latitude. So I've set this software up so that we are in Nottingham. So hopefully you can see the date down here, which is set to the 21st of June, 2011. The time is 3:42 in the morning, which is why it's dark. And we're looking due east. So we expect the sun to rise somewhere in this vicinity. We're going to track through. The sky's getting lighter, and bang, there the sun appears above the horizon. But it's not appearing due east, not at all. Appearing quite a long way north of east. And that's the furthest north that the sun is going to get this year. And to explain what's happening, I can actually put up a grid. And this is the projection of our longitude and latitude on the Earth projected out onto the celestial sphere. If you look up, 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 you can see the projection of the North Pole. You can see that the path the sun takes along the sky certainly isn't in a straight up and down direction. It's following this very long curved arc. Because it starts so far north here, on the longest day it has this huge long arc that travels across the sky. What I can actually do here though is advance through the year. I'll go week by week now, and we're going to stay at the same time every day. So we're around about 9:30, and you'll notice the sun is dramatically changing its position. And in fact, If we get all the way down to December 21st, we get the opposite effect. We get the winter solstice, where the sun rises at its most southerly position. So if I swing round, now we're looking due south, and again, if I fast forward through one day, you'll see here the sun just barely arcs above the horizon. And that's why at northerly latitudes, as we are in Nottingham, we're at a latitude of 52 degrees, the winter days are very short. This is happening for the same reason we have the seasons. It's happening because the Earth's axis is tilted towards and away from the sun by an angle of 23.5 degrees. So if the Earth's axis wasn't tilted, we wouldn't have seasons at all. Every day would be the same as the last. But because of this tilt in the Earth's axis, some parts of the Earth at different times of year are bathed in more sunlight. Make this same effect by going outside your house and taking a picture of the rising sun or the sun at any time of day, as long as it was the same time of day every year. And as we fast forward through first one year, and now another year, week by week, you see this very distinctive pattern building up, this figure of 8. And this is called an analemma. This is the path that the sun takes throughout the year. And if we look at the top of the analemma, and now I'll advance day by day, you see that the position of the sun's motion seems to slow down and almost stop. The point at which it stops is the solstice. So the word solstice comes from the Latin sol, which is sun, and sistere, which is to stand still. So the sun obviously isn't actually standing still, but as we look at it day by day, its transition in a northerly and southerly direction seems to pause, turn around, and head in the other direction. At each end is the solstice, and at the middle happens twice a year. September 21st and March 21st is the equinox. That's the other important point in the annual calendar with respect to the sun's motion through the earth. So at the equinox, if we reverse back to sunrise on this day, September 21st, we'll find that, boom, the sun now rises due east. So on 2 days of the year, no matter where you are on earth, the sun will rise exactly. The behavior of the sun that we see depends very much on where we are on earth. So we can, for example, take a trip with this software up to the North Pole. So of course, at the summer solstice on the North Pole is tilted directly towards the sun. It's going to be bathed in perpetual sunlight all day. There's going to be no sunrise and no sunset. So what do you think happens to the sun? Now at the North Pole, it's the 21st of June. If we fast forward through a day now, the sun will just appear to rotate around the horizon at the same altitude. No sunrise, no sunset. Whereas if we visit the equinox here, so back at September 21st, the sun's just going to cruise right around the horizon for the entire day. That's the last you're going to see of the sun for 6 months, because the next day it's going to dip down below the horizon and it's going to stay there until the next equinox, where it reappears and moves its way above the horizon. If we look at a globe, old-fashioned globes, you may have noticed a couple of lines marked on there. One is the Tropic of Cancer in the north, and one is the Tropic of Capricorn in the south. And that's the latitude at which the sun is directly overhead on the summer solstice. So here in Nottingham, the sun actually never gets directly overhead. It's always sort of tilted with respect to the horizon. But between these two lines of latitude, at some point during the year, the sun will be directly overhead. Now that's an interesting little factoid, but 2,000 years ago, it led to a Greek astronomer calculating very simply the circumference of the Earth. So the reason he was able to do this was that he discovered, this was Eratosthenes, and he was in ancient Egypt, and he discovered in a manuscript a description of a town called Cyrene, I think, which was located on the Tropic of Cancer. And there was a special feature about this town that was noted down. On the summer solstice, the sun would shine directly down a particular well there and not cast a shadow. And he was a very clever man, and he realized that this wasn't the same behavior that was exhibited at Alexandria, where he was some distance to the north. At the summer solstice, a stick or a well in the ground would actually cast a shadow. So he made a measurement on the summer solstice of this shadow located in Alexandria and came up with a measurement of 7.5 degrees. And he figured, he thought, like many ancient Greeks, that the earth was round. And he thought, okay, 7.5 degrees is approximately 1/50th of 360 degrees, a full circle. Therefore, the distance between Alexandria and Cyrene must be 1/50th of the circumference of the earth. According to the story, he then paid someone to march out and measure the distance between those two cities, two towns, and he actually came up with a calculation of the circumference of the earth that was good to within about 4%, which was pretty impressive. All from measuring a few angles and a distance and knowing a bit about how the sun moved around the sky.
In the flat Earth model, the sun and moon luminaries revolve around the Earth once every 24 hours for the sun and approximately 25 hours for the moon, illuminating like spotlights the areas over which they pass. The sun's annual journey from tropic to tropic, solstice to solstice, is what determines the length and character of days, nights, and seasons. This is why equatorial regions experience almost year-round summer and heat, while higher latitudes north and especially south experience more distinct seasons with harsh winters. The heliocentric model claims seasons change based on the ball Earth's alleged axial tilt and elliptical orbit around the sun. Their flawed current model even places us closest to the sun, 91,400,000 miles, in January, when it is actually winter, and farthest from the sun, 94,500,000 miles, in July, when it's actually summer throughout much of the Earth. They say due to the ball Earth's tilt, different places receive different amounts of direct sunlight, and that is what produces the seasonal and temperature changes. This makes little sense, however, because if the sun's heat travels over 90 million miles to reach the ball Earth, how could a slight tilt, a mere few thousand miles maximum, negate the sun's 90 million mile journey, giving us simultaneous tropical summers and Antarctic winters? Thomas Winship said, "The Earth is a stretched out structure which diverges from the central north in all directions towards the south. The equator, being midway between the north center and the southern circumference, divides the course of the sun into north and south declination. The longest circle around the world which the sun makes is when it has reached its greatest southern declination. Gradually going northwards, the circle is contracted. In about 3 months after the southern extremity of its path has been reached, the sun makes a circle around the equator. Still pursuing a northerly course as it goes round and above the world, in another 3 months the greatest northern declination is reached, when the sun again begins to go towards the south. In north latitudes, when the sun is going north, it rises earlier each day, is higher at noon, and sets later, while in southern latitudes at the same time, the sun as a matter of course rises later, reaches a lesser altitude at noon, and sets earlier. In northern latitudes, during the southern summer, say from September to December, the sun rises later each day, is lower at noon, and sets earlier, while in the south he rises earlier, reaches a higher altitude at noon, and sets later each day. This movement round the earth daily is the cause of the alternations of day and night, while his northerly and southerly courses produce the seasons. When the sun is south of the equator, it is summer in the south and winter in the north, and vice versa. The fact of the alternation of the seasons flatly contradicts the Newtonian delusion that the earth revolves in an orbit around the sun. It is said that summer is caused by the earth being nearest the sun, and winter by its being farthest from the sun. But if the reader will follow the argument in any textbook, he will see that according to the theory, when the earth is nearest the sun, there must be summer in both northern and southern latitudes, and in like manner, when it is farthest from the sun, it must be winter all over the earth at the same time, because the whole of the globe earth would then be farthest from the sun.
In short, it is impossible to account for the recurrence of seasons on the assumption that the Earth is globular and that it revolves in an orbit around the Sun. Gabrielle Henriette said, "The essential feature of the year is its division into 2 equal periods of 6 months, based first on the predominating length of the days over that of the nights, and vice versa, conditions which are governed by the varying hours of sunrise and sunset, and secondly, by the either high or low height reached by the sun in the heavens at midday. The first cycle, during which the days are longer than the nights, and the sun reaches its culminating point of the year, extends from the spring equinox to the autumn equinox, i.e. March 21st to September 22nd, and the second cycle, during which, inversely, the duration of the nights exceeds that of the days, and the sun descends to its lowest point of the year, extends from the autumn equinox to the spring equinox, i.e. September 23rd to March 20th. These 2 6-month periods are also characterized by an opposition of temperature. During the first cycle, which corresponds to spring and summer, the heat gradually rises and falls, while during the second cycle, which comprises autumn and winter, it is the intensity of the cold which progressively increases and decreases." If the Earth were truly a globe, the Arctic and Antarctic polar regions and areas of comparable latitude north and south of the equator should share similar conditions and characteristics such as comparable temperatures, seasonal changes, length of daylight, plant and animal life. In reality, however, the Arctic and Antarctic regions and areas of comparable latitude north and south of the equator differ greatly in many ways. Thomas Winship says, "If the Earth be the globe of popular belief, the same amount of heat and cold, summer and winter, should be experienced at the same latitudes north and south of the equator. The same number of plants and animals would be found, and the same general conditions exist. That the very opposite is the case disproves the globular assumption. The great contrasts between places at the same latitudes north and south of the equator is a strong argument against the received doctrine of the rotundity of the Earth. Antarctica is by far the coldest place on Earth, with an average annual temperature of approximately -57 degrees Fahrenheit and a record low of 135.8. The average annual temperature at the North Pole, however, is a comparatively warm 4 degrees. Throughout the year, temperatures in the Antarctic vary less than half the amount at comparable Arctic latitudes. The northern Arctic region enjoys moderately warm summers and manageable winters, whereas the southern Antarctic region never even warms enough to melt the perpetual snow and ice." Thomas Winship wrote, "This uniformity of temperature partly accounts for the great accumulation of ice which is formed, not on account of the great severity of the winter, but because there is practically no summer to melt it. In the Antarctic there is eternal winter, and snow never melts. As far north as a man has traveled, he has found reindeer and hare basking in the sun, and country brilliant with rich flora. Within the Antarctic Circle, no plant is to be found. The island of Kerguelen at 49 degrees southern latitude has only 18 species of native plants that can survive its hostile climate. Compare this with the island of Iceland at 65 degrees northern latitude, 16 degrees further north of the equator than Kerguelen is south, yet Iceland is home to 870 species of native plants. On the Isle of Georgia, just 54 degrees southern latitude, the same latitude as Canada or England in the north, where dense forests of various tall trees abound, the infamous Captain Cook wrote that he was unable to find a single shrub large enough to make a toothpick. Cook wrote, "Not a tree was to be seen. The lands which lie to the south are doomed by nature to perpetual frigidness, never to feel the warmth of the sun's rays, whose horrible and savage aspect I have not words to describe. Even marine life is sparse in certain tracts of vast extent, and the sea-bird is seldom observed flying over such lonely wastes. The contrasts between the limits of organic life in Arctic and Antarctic zones is very remarkable and significant. Vegetables and land animals are found at nearly 80 degrees in the north, while from the parallel of 58 degrees in the south, the lichen and such-like plants only clothe the rocks, and seabirds and the cetaceous tribes alone are seen upon the desolate beaches. In the Arctic there are 4 clearly distinguished seasons, warm summers, and an abundance of plant and animal life, none of which can be said of the Antarctic. The Eskimo live as far north as the 79th parallel, whereas in the south no native man is found higher than the 56th. W.N.R. Chambers, in Arctic Explorations, wrote, "Beyond the 70th degree of southern latitude, not a tree meets the eye. Wearied with the white waste of snow, forests, woods, even shrubs have disappeared, and given place to a few lichens and creeping woody plants, which scantily clothe the indurated soil. Still, in the farthest north, nature claims her birthright of beauty, and in the brief and rapid summer she brings forth numerous flowers and grasses to bloom for a few days, to be again blasted by the swiftly recurring winter. The rapid fervor of an Arctic summer had already, June 1st, converted the snowy waste into luxuriant pasture ground, rich in flowers and grass, with almost the same lively appearance as that of an English meadow." In New Zealand, situated at 42 degrees southern latitude, on the winter solstice the sun rises at 4:31 a.m. and sets at 7:29 p.m., making the longest day of the year 14 hours and 58 minutes. On the summer solstice, the New Zealand sun rises at 7:29 a.m. and sets at 4:31 p.m., making the shortest day 9 hours and 2 minutes long. Meanwhile, in England, a full 10 degrees farther north of the equator than New Zealand lies south, the longest day is 16 hours and 34 minutes, the shortest day 7 hours and 45 minutes. Therefore, the longest day in New Zealand is 1 hour and 36 minutes shorter than the longest day in England, and the shortest day in New Zealand is 1 hour and 17 minutes longer than the shortest day in England. William Swainson, an Englishman who emigrated and became Attorney General of New Zealand in the mid-19th century, lived in both countries for decades and wrote of their differences, stating, "The range of temperature is limited, there being no excess of either heat or cold. Compared with the climate of England, the summer of New Zealand is but very little warmer, though considerably longer. Even in summer, people here have no notion of going without fires in the evening. But then, though the days are very warm and sunny, the nights are always cold. For 7 months last summer, we had not one day that the sun did not shine as brilliantly as it does in England in the finest day in June, and though it has more power here, the heat is not nearly so oppressive. But then there is not the twilight which you get in England. Here it is light till about 8 o'clock, then in a few minutes it becomes too dark to see anything, and the change comes over in almost no time. The seasons are the reverse of those in England. Spring commences in September, summer in December, autumn in April, and winter in June. The days are an hour shorter at each end of the day in summer, and an hour longer in the winter than in England." In the flat earth model of the cosmos, these Arctic and Antarctic phenomena are easily accounted for and exactly what would be expected. If the sun circles over and around the earth every 24 hours, steadily traveling from tropic to tropic every 6 months, it follows that the northern, central region would annually receive far more heat and sunlight than the southern circumferential region. Since the sun must sweep over the larger southern region in the same 24 hours it has to pass over the smaller northern region, its passage must necessarily be proportionally faster as well. This is why the Antarctic morning dawn and evening twilight are very abrupt, whereas in extreme north, twilight continues for hours after sunset, and many midsummer nights the sun does not set at all. Dr. Samuel Robotham said, "If the sun is fixed and the earth revolves underneath it, the same phenomena would exist at the same distance on each side of the equator. But such is not the case. What can operate to cause the twilight in New Zealand to be so much more sudden, or the nights so much colder than in England? The southern hemisphere cannot revolve more rapidly than the northern. The latitudes are about the same, and the distance round a globe would be the same at 50 degrees south as at 50 degrees north, and as the whole would revolve once in 24 hours, the surface at the two places would pass underneath the sun with the same velocity, and the light would approach in the morning and recede in the evening in exactly the same manner. Yet the very contrary is the fact. The constant sunlight of the north develops, with the utmost rapidity, numerous forms of vegetable life, and furnishes subsistence for millions of living creatures. But in the south, where the sunlight never dwells, or lingers about a central region, but rapidly sweeps over sea and land, to complete in 24 hours the great circle of the southern circumference, it has not time to excite and stimulate the surface, and therefore, even in comparatively low southern latitudes, everything wears an aspect of desolation. These differences in the north and south could not exist if the earth were a globe, turning upon axes underneath a non-moving sun. The two hemispheres would at the same latitudes have the same degree of light and heat, and the same general phenomena, both in kind and degree. The peculiarities which are found in the south as compared with the north are only such as could exist upon a stationary plane, having a northern center, concentric with which is the path of the moving sun. And William Carpenter wrote, "Every year the sun is as long south of the equator as he is north, and if the earth were not stretched out as it is, in fact, but turned under, as the Newtonian theory suggests, it would certainly get as intensive a share of the sun's rays south as north. But the southern region being, in consequence of the fact stated, far more extensive than the region north, the sun, having to complete his journey round every 24 hours, travels quicker as he goes further south, from September to December, and his influence has less time in which to accumulate at any given point. Since, then, the facts could not be as they are if the earth were a globe, it is a proof that the earth is not a globe."
Called sun time. Okay, and if you can see over here it says longitude and time calculator. So I think what's going on is you've got these are the hours. So 24 hours, here's 1 hour. What he's saying is this is how long, this is 1 hour, it takes the sun an hour to go from here to there. And then here in the northern hemisphere, it takes the sun an hour to go from here to there. That's what this is about. And he's patented this, and there was supposed to be another ruler here. It's broken off. This is just a photo. So, for example, if the sun in the winter, that's the Tropic of Capricorn. From here to there, that takes an hour. So you follow this all the way around in 24 hours. Okay, now it's always 24 hours. That's how long every day is in the winter or summer. So that was just 24 hours there. Now as you head later on in the summer, now here's the Tropic of, let's find that, okay, Tropic of Cancer. Summer, now look at this. Now the sun, for example here, between these longitude lines, it takes an hour to go from here to there, a much shorter distance, about half the distance, which means the sun has to move a lot slower just to go from here to there. That's an hour. So you go from here to there to there. Okay, so the sun actually slows down. That's why the days are longer, because the sun is just hovering above us for a longer period of time.
At Little America, a warning sounds. The fleet is in sudden danger. It is being frozen in. It may be locked within the Bay of Whales. Here is the treacherous foe. If caught, the ships will be wedged against the barrier, crushed. Here will be the graveyard of the fleet. The Coast Guard icebreaker Northwind goes into action, ramming, backing, ramming again to break up the crushing floes. Landing craft work frantically to loosen the ice around the ships so propellers may turn without shearing off. One by one, the ships are cleared, get underway. Byrd remains behind with 197 volunteers in grave problems. His most important exploration flights will now lack the powerful directional radio to Mount Olympus. To get his men out, he must hope the icebreaker can crash her way back in time. Otherwise, he and his men will be frozen in for the 9 sunless months of the dark, treacherous Antarctic winter. Otherwise, he and his men will be frozen in for the 9 sunless months of the dark, treacherous Antarctic winter.
You 3 criminals have been caught in a further act of seditious treason. General Zod, your only feeling was contempt for our society. Your only desire was to command. Ursa, the only feeling you showed was for your vicious general. Your only wish to rule at his side. Don, you are as without thought as you are without voice. This council has no hesitation in proclaiming you all guilty. 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 Guilty.